Hey, good morning. Hey, I'm gonna go tour the battlefield at Gettysburg today. So come along with me and let's go learn something. Okay, we've made it here. We're gonna go in and check it out.
Yes, I did. Did you? Yeah, I knew all that. That's the impression that we got.
Modernistic structure put up there in the 1960s that
Okay, good morning, folks. How's everybody this morning?
Good, thank you.
Well, on this beautiful day. Well, welcome to Gettysburg. My name is Cheryl. I'll be your driver for the next 2 hours. You've already met our guide, Rich Goodcope. He's our guide for today. And we're going to be taking you around the battlefield for the next 2 hours. A couple of things I want to go over first. I know we have at least 2 veterans, one right here, and I think there was another one. If we have any more veterans on board, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, very much for your service. Now, I'd like to briefly tell you a little bit about Rich and our guide force. In 2015, they celebrated 100 years of licensed battlefield guiding. Today, he is one of about 140 guides, and only 17 of them are women. They come from all different ages and backgrounds. Right now, we have a couple in their early 30s, and they go all the way up to their mid-70s to early 80s, and they're still actively guiding. Now, in 1968, that was a very special year here. One of our guides received his license then, June 30th to be exact, and he just started his 54th year of consecutive guiding. It is also the same year that women received their license, and the reason we didn't have any before that, ladies, you ready for this? Park Service said this job was open to men only. But since then, we have had 53 women guides in the last 54 years. Right now, our youngest woman guide, she's in her early 30s. She was given the privilege of having the badge of the first woman that was ever given their license. Her name was Barbara Schutz, and she's very proud to wear that. Now, our senior woman guide, she is in her 48th year of guiding. She's a retired teacher from Gettysburg Area School District, and said this is her 48th year. Now, our guides, they're licensed and thoroughly tested by the Park Service, but they are not government employees. They are independent contractors, and gratuities are very much appreciated. Okay, so let me go out and find out where we're going.
let me find out where people are from, or your state is. I'm listening. Alabama.
New Jersey.
New Jersey.
Maryland.
Maryland.
Indiana.
Indiana.
Connecticut.
Connecticut.
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania. That's okay. A little shorter trip for most of you, unless you're from Erie or something. Yeah. Anybody from New York on board?
New York.
Any other states that we haven't mentioned? Oh, you haven't mentioned. Ohio. Okay. Any international visitors with us? Okay. Delaware. Well, that's not an international visit. You do have a state monument here, though.
Mars.
And we'll see that very close to the end of the tour. Let me give you folks an overview of the battle, and we're going to make 3 get-out stops on this tour. One will be at Oak Hill for the first day of the battle. We'll also make 1 stop on the Confederate battle line to set up the second day of the battle, and then we will be getting out to do Pickett's Charge. Probably quite a few of you know that Little Round Top has been closed beginning on July 23rd. It's going to be closed for 18 months. So we can talk a little bit about it, but we cannot be up on it. That's the way things work. It has a massive erosion problem on it, and they're attempting to mediate that for future generations. So the first day's fighting takes place north and west of town. That will be a Confederate victory. The only day of the 3 that they outnumber the Union forces, and over time they're attacking from 3 directions: the west, the north, and the east. And this will force 2 Union infantry corps, originally around 20,000 men, to retreat to the town, and where they'll wind up at Cemetery Hill, high ground south and east of town. 2nd and 3rd, fighting predominantly south of the town of Gettysburg. Union position should be in the shape of a gigantic fish hook, or upside-down J, about 3 miles in length, with a Confederate line wrapping around it on 3 sides, 5 miles long. On the 2nd, Confederates are following up their victory on the 1st by attacking both ends or flanks of the Union line. They'll gain some ground, critical terrain still in Union hands. So on July 3rd, they'll launch an attack against the Union center. This will be Pickett's Charge. 12,500 Confederates across an open mile of ground, preceded by an almost 2-hour-long 2nd Corps commander. Only woman statue in the battlefield over here to your left to Elizabeth Thorne, who along with her father will bury over 90 Union soldiers while she's 6 months pregnant. And there's the historic gatehouse, a lot of windows. And one more equestrian, that will be one to Oliver Howard, the Union 11th Corps commander. He's from Maine, and he's looking more out towards the July 1st battlefield, where the men of the 11th Corps do most of their fighting. As we drive through the town a bit to get out to the first day, I'll point out some buildings that have some significance. This would include the site for the only civilian death, which takes place in the small brick house you see here to your right. 20-year-old Jenny Wade, making bread for her sister, recently had a baby. A bullet is fired from the town, which will go through a door on this left-hand side of the building, striking her in the back. She's instantly killed. Somewhat amazing, I think, that there was only 1 civilian death, because you're talking about 7 million bullets and 60,000 artillery shells fired during the 3 days of the battle. Up on your right, although they're not buildings, you see 2 large sycamore trees. I mention them because they were here at the time of the battle. They're considered witness trees. One of them just over here past this white sign. And if you glance to your left, behind these 2 pine trees, you should be able to see some white pock marks in the Farnsworth house, and those are bullet holes. The Confederates are in that upstairs attic window being front lines, with the Confederates controlling most of the town by the end of the first day. Buildings that were here, glance left and right, typically have small bronze plaques on them. Civil War building, July 1863, around 250 of the original 400. This gray building is the one that Jenny Wade is born in. Many of these would have been used as hospitals after the battle, including a Presbyterian church that you see coming up here on your right, which is also the church that the 34th President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower, attended when he was living in Gettysburg in the 1950s and 60s. Population of the town then, something over 2,400 people. Today the borough has about 8,000. In terms of what people did for a living, more broadly engaged in farming than anything else. Second leading occupation, carriage making. 10 of those in town. And also, I think, fairly uniquely for a town of this size, 2 colleges, the oldest being the Lutheran Theological Seminary dating to 1826, and the other one a prep school for the seminary, then known as Pennsylvania College, now known as Gettysburg College, nickname of their athletic teams, the Bullets. Now as we enter the center square of the town, glance to your right, you see a dark red 3-story brick building, David Will's house. That's where Lincoln spends the evening of November 18th, finishing off the Gettysburg address. His bedroom, second floor, second window to the right. It was not written on the back of an envelope as he got here. It actually went through several careful edits, with the last one being in the David Will's house. Now I'm transitioning pretty much exclusively to the battle now. It's dates of the first 3 days of July, 1863, which will place Gettysburg sort of in the middle of the Civil War. Beginning with the firing on Fort Sumter, Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, April of 1861, and won't wind up ending until April, May of 1865 with the surrender of the various Confederate armies. Two armies engaged here. Union Army, called the Army of Potomac, commanded by 47-year-old George Meade, who only takes over Army command 3 days before the battle, at full strength, approximately 90,000 men. The Confederate Army, led by a much more famous individual, this is going to be 56-year-old Robert E. Lee. He commands the Army of Northern Virginia with around 75,000 men, although keep in mind that neither side is going to fully concentrate here until late in the day on July 2nd. Now, some of you are probably wondering why both armies wind up here in south central Pennsylvania. This will be determined by the Confederate Army, who in mid-May of 1863, a little bit after the Battle of Chancellorsville, fought in Virginia, will decide to bring the war north. Multiple reasons. Number one, get both armies out of Virginia, which have been heavily fought over, so that their farmers could grow crops. They knew if they left, the Union Army would pursue them. They're also looking for supplies, and will do this very successfully. During a 5-week-long campaign, Confederates gather enough supplies to extend the life of the Army of Northern Virginia by 3 to 6 months. Third reason, trying to relieve the pressure on Vicksburg, which is where Grant is located in Mississippi. That doesn't work particularly well. Vicksburg falls to Union forces on July 4th, making it a really bad week for the Confederate States of America, as they're going to lose 2 major battles within the course of 48 hours. And the last reason is they're looking for another battle at some point in time against the Union Army, but this time on northern soil, a road victory, hoping that a decisive one might lead to negotiations which would include Confederate independence. So it's possible that the Confederates win this battle in an overwhelming fashion. We wind up becoming permanently 2 countries. As we head up the Chambersburg Road, you have a good view coming up here to your left, and probably the most landmark building in the town, the brick structure with the blue-green dome or cupola on it, used as a lookout by Union soldiers on the morning of July 1st. By late in the day, the Confederates are up there. As we go over this ridgeline, we'll be on the first day's battlefield, north and west of the town of Gettysburg, and you'll be looking at a part of the 6,000 acres, 9.5 square miles of terrain controlled by the National Park Service. Some historic structures, meaning buildings that were here at the time of the battle, like the stone part McPherson barn over there to your left, dating to around 1820. Reconstructed fence lines where farmers would have had them to mark boundaries to keep their livestock in or the livestock out. Artillery pieces, of which about 2/3 of the tubes are original, carriages are reproductions, and over 1,300 monuments, markers, and plaques. The largest number of which are Union. They won. History test written by the victors, Pennsylvania, Union State. Most of these go up the 30 years between 1880 and 1910. Back then, the former Confederate States, not a lot of money to spend on things like monuments, a fair amount of hard feelings involved, so they're encouraged to place monuments here. Most of them wind up becoming state monuments, of which you'll see a number along the southern end of Seminary Ridge. In front of us now is McPherson Ridge. We have statues to the 2 most important Union figures on July 1st. On the equestrian statue, General John Reynolds, the Union 1st Corps commander. And a little bit beyond him, the standing portrait statue of John Buford, whose Union cavalry will fight off their horses, dismounted, on ridge lines west of town, slowing down the Confederates by around 2.5 hours, and giving Reynolds enough time to bring up the lead elements of the Union First Corps. Notice also both those statues facing west. Always want to have your statue facing the enemy. If it's not, you wouldn't have gotten one to begin with. Might have meant you hightailed it. Now earlier I showed you where the only civilian in the battle is killed. We have a statue here for the only civilian that we know of who fights in the battle. It's coming up on your left. 69-year-old John Burns. He comes out here with his Kentucky flintlock rifle and asks the Union Army, can I help out? They'll eventually say yes. He'll pitch in, be lightly wounded 3 times. And when Lincoln visits Gettysburg, he's going to visit Burns at his house because he'd become one of the heroes of the battle. Actually been a soldier during the War of 1812. This is where Reynolds places some of the 1st Union Infantry. Many places in this area have a nickname. They're known as the Iron Brigade. Made up of 5 regiments from the estates of the old Northwest Territory, including states like Wisconsin, Indiana, and Michigan. Over here on your right, on your left, a monument to the 24th Michigan. They start out with 500 men. At the end of the first day, they have a roll call. 99 men answer the call. North Carolinians in the afternoon. For that person who said they were from Indiana, you will see the 19th Indiana monument over here to your right. Here it is. And they're going to be confronted by North Carolinians on the 1st, and will be forced to retreat back along with the rest of the Iron Brigade to Seminary Ridge. And you can see it in the distance. Here's the blue-green dome or cupola of the seminary building. Another reason for very high Civil War battle casualties is due to the fact that both sides are still using, for the most part, Napoleonic linear tactics, the front rank elbow to elbow, back rank elbow to elbow, trying to fire as much lead as they could at their opponent, who unfortunately is doing the same thing to them. Difference, Napoleonic era, most weapons, smoothbore barrels, firing round bullets. You'd be lucky to hit somebody at 50 yards with one. You now fast forward to the Civil War, and most weapons are rifled. Lands and grooves on the inside of the barrel part a spin to a conically shaped bullet, which makes it pretty accurate at 200 yards. Weaponry outstrips the tactics. Generals take a long time to figure this all out. Reynolds doesn't have too much time to figure it out because he'll be killed close to where that larger marker is over on your left, where those 2 people are standing. Highest ranking officer to die in the battle. Secretly engaged to one from New York. They kept the engagement secret. Reason she was Catholic, he was Protestant. The families would not have approved. His intended, Catherine Hewitt, will never marry and becomes a nun at Mount St. Mary's, Gettysburg, Maryland, only 10 miles to our south.
You're in a bus.
I know. I did guard those trip runs.
Now, Confederates are going to get the jump on the Union Army coming out of Virginia. So the 3rd week of June, they're within Pennsylvania, but spread out over quite a wide area. 2/3 of the Confederate Army to our west or left of us, between Cashtown and Chambersburg, roughly 8 and 20 miles. Also a large Confederate presence almost 40 miles north of us, right outside of the state capital of Harrisburg. Give them one more day, and they would have temporarily captured Harrisburg with some political consequences. And lastly, Confederates will be as far to the east as the Susquehanna River.
I'll pick that up coming back.
So what happens on June 28th is that Lee finds out from a spy the position of the Union Army, something he'd not known for several days. He's told that it's north of Frederick, Maryland, south of us, and heading in this direction. Now Lee becomes alarmed because his army is spread out in 3 different directions. He's afraid that it could be defeated piece by piece. So what he'll do is to issue orders to concentrate the Army of Northern Virginia, and what he's going to call the Gettysburg, which would be to our right or east, or Cashtown to our west or left area. So this battle is unplanned. It's frequently called a meeting engagement. It occurs here for 3 reasons. Number 1, the 2 armies are getting close. Secondly, it's the road network, which acts as a magnet and drawing both armies here. It's a lot easier to move men on roads than moving them from farmers' fields and woodlots. And thirdly, the Union Army decides to contest the Confederate advance along the Chambersburg Road, with the first shot being fired about a mile and a half to the west of the McPherson barn by a soldier in the 8th Illinois Cavalry. We even know his name, Marcellus Jones. Yes, Roman names were popular back then.
It's almost like we're in a tunnel or something.
And then when they cut it down, it seems
I think it's just too much.
it looks nice, but
Yeah, well, that's what Frank Seal.
Now coming up on our right, we're heading to Oak Hill. Our get-out stop will be at that tree line you see in the distance. The second monument on your right is the 6th New York Cavalry. It goes up in 1890 at a cost of $8,500. You have to multiply that by about a factor of 30 for the present day cost. You'll also see as we pass by a bronze relief, which was designed by the Tiffany Company in New York City, which shows these men, at least according to them, in a cavalry charge. But I believe I told you earlier that Buford's cavalry fought off their horses dismounted, so they're portraying themselves in a more glorious manner. Or as one visitor told me a number of years ago, and I've stolen his line when he said, the older we got, the better we were. So that's a fish story. They did have cavalry charges someplace, but not here at Gettysburg. Now in the distance, if you look long enough at it, I think you will see the flickering flame of the Eternal Peace Light Memorial. Dedicated in 1938, 75th anniversary of the battle, last major reunion of Civil War soldiers. On that field to the left of the monument, there were 1,800 Civil War veterans here. Average age, 94. One man claimed to be 112, listening to a speech given by President Franklin Roosevelt. The monument itself is made of Maine granite on its base, Alabama limestone on the shaft, so it's also supposed to symbolize the reunification of the North and the South. Perhaps some of you are aware that President Kennedy's grave in Arlington also has an eternal flame on it, and there's a connection between the two. He, Jackie, and Caroline, in late March of 1963, are given a tour of the battlefield. After he's assassinated, Jackie remembers that he admired this monument. Because, you know, one of President Johnson's aides called the park to find out what an eternal flame is, and that's the reason it's one in his grave in Arlington, because of the visit they'd had here the previous spring.
Okay, I'll point out terrain features to you first, but we can use a little bit of shorthand later. Behind this Oak Hill, this will become an uncontested Confederate position. Directly south of us, McPherson Barn, western and eastern McPherson Ridges. To our left, much closer, Oak Ridge, where the monuments are, okay? In the distance beyond that to the left, you see some of the buildings of modern-day Gettysburg College. And if you look above that, you'll see a tree line. Those trees just to the right of the blue-green water tower are in the Soldiers' National Cemetery, although at the time of the battle, virtually treeless, mostly landscaping in the cemetery. And then over here to your left, this low ground, sometimes called the Gettysburg Plain, will be where the Union 11th Corps will fight. And for those of you who are, not way over there, over that side, you can see a large green patch of land. Maybe you can make out a monument or two. That's Barlow's Knoll on your map, okay? Now here's the progress of the fighting on July 1st. First shot fired out along the Chambersburg Road by a soldier in the 8th Illinois Cavalry. What Buford's trying to do is to slow down the Confederate approach. He doesn't have enough men to stop them. So they're fighting off their horses dismounted for about 2.5 hours. They will eventually fall back to McPherson Ridge. And that's around the time, now 10 o'clock in the morning, when General Reynolds will bring in the lead elements of the Union First Corps. There'll be significant infantry fighting in and around the barn, and also in the tree line behind it in more than one stage. At around noon, 1 o'clock, the position we're on right now becomes a Confederate position for the troops that 3 days earlier are outside of Harrisburg. Robert Rhodes' division of Ewell's Corps, 8,000 infantry. And when they get here, they're looking at quite an opportunity, because the Union Army is primarily north and south of the McPherson Barn, fighting Confederates who are coming in from the west. That's from our right to left. They now have a chance to strike the Union position from a second direction, or to put it in more commonplace language, flank them. Rhodes will place artillery on Oak Hill. Now, we drive around the park, you're going to see two types of artillery pieces. Some of them are going to be blue-green in color. That's copper rust or oxidation. They would have been sort of a goldish-brown color. Those are mostly smooth-bore barrels firing round projectiles that could fire a mile in distance. Black artillery pieces, I can see one right where I'm pointing to, right behind us, are made of iron. Those are rifled. Lands and grooves on the inside of the barrel will impart a spin to a conically shaped projectile which could fire it at maximum elevation 2.8 miles. Although they rarely fired them that far because they didn't really utilize the concept of forward observers. But this opportunity for an early first day Confederate victory, which in the scheme of things could have been quite important, is going to be pushed forward by 3 to 4 hours. Reasons involved include the fact that when General Rhodes begins his infantry attacks from Oak Hill, in their early stages, they're going to be disorganized. Plus more Union reinforcements arrive. More men from the 1st Corps get here, Union. They take positions along Oak Ridge. And also the entirety of the 11th Corps arrives. 9,000 men. Half of them, German immigrants. A third held in reserve on Cemetery Hill. The other 2/3 deployed in this low ground more in the distance until around 3:30 in the afternoon, when they're struck all the way out there at Barlow's Knoll by Confederates who are arriving here from the east. That's Jubal Early's division of Ewell's Corps. And that will start the 11th Corps line retreating. Eventually the remnants of it make it back to Cemetery Hill, but of those 9,000 men, 40% have now become casualties, killed, wounded, captured, and missing. By this point in time, the Union 1st Corps has retreated back to the seminary buildings. You have a sense of where they are. They're behind the trees right now. We'll see them again in a little while, and they'll have their last stand there at 4 o'clock. Union 1st Corps, 11,000 infantry. They will sustain on July 1st just over 50% casualties. But what they've done collectively, along with Buford's Cavalry Division, is to hold the high ground at Cemetery Hill, which will make the difference for them on the 2nd and 3rd.
Good morning, sir.
Morning, how you doing today?
Good, how are you?
All righty. Gorgeous, yeah, you can't have anything better than this out here. This is fantastic. We're on Seminary Ridge now. There's a Confederate position looking across that. Cemetery Hill, Cemetery Ridge, and then the round taps. Little and big round tap. The big round tap a little bit concealed from my viewpoint, but you can see it in the distance. Now the planning for the 2nd day of the battle. On the Union side, they've determined by midday on July 1st that they're going to fight a defensive battle. The terrain works better in that regard. The Confederates can be on the attack, and they begin discussing this attack late in the day on July 1st when Lee has a meeting with his senior corps commander, James Longstreet, near the seminary building. It takes place late afternoon, July 1st. Longstreet arrives first. He takes out his field glasses, although he had a somewhat different view than we have right now. He's not liking what he's looking at. More and more Union infantry and artillery, and this distance of almost a mile that his men would have to traverse. So he's going to give Lee options to avoid doing that. One of these options would have been staying in position here and awaiting Union attack. Now, you could probably do that for a day or two, but eventually Union cavalry will eliminate your ability to forage for supplies, and you're not going to find ammunition in Farmer Brown's barn. A second option is to take a part of the Confederate Army around the round taps and strike the Union position in reverse. I think for that option, Lee is primarily concerned about his route of retreat and resupply back through the mountains. That's the way he got here that's probably the way he's going to have to get back. So he'll say to Longstreet, the enemy is there, there we will strike him. So his plan for July 2nd is for a two-pronged attack against Cemetery Hill, with Longstreet's 14,000 men on July 2nd attacking up the Emmitsburg Road, which is just beyond where you can see the plantings, strike the Union position where Lee thought it was. Where was that? Close to where those trees are to the left of the Kadori barn, and then continuing on towards Cemetery Hill. And then remember where you saw those two equestrian statues earlier along Baltimore Pike? That would be the general area toward which Richard Ewell's corps would be attacking. So what they're trying to do is to strike the bend in the line, Cemetery Hill, from two different directions. Now the Confederates are going to have a couple of problems on July 2nd. One is that Lee does not know for certain where the Union left is. He thinks it's there. We know at times it's in Little Round Top. We know at times it's in the Devil's Den, which is 500 yards in front of Little Round Top. Why the discrepancy? He's working with intelligence gathered early in the morning, and the attack's going to take place in the late afternoon, so things have changed. The second problem, as Longstreet's men are getting into position behind the trees you can see way in the distance, they get to a place where, with field glasses, they can see a Union signal station on Little Round Top. Then with semaphore flags, more importantly, their own field glasses. Now you see the problem. If you can see them, they can probably see you. So what they'll do in 85-degree weather and high humidity will be to countermarch back close to where they started from, taking a deeper ridge line so they're concealed. They're going to march an additional 8 miles in 85-degree weather, which will obviously tire some of them out. It's also going to eat up 3 hours of daylight. Even with those two problems, Confederates on July 2nd come very close to winning the battle at more than one place. I think they come as close as they do for two broad reasons. The fighting on July 2nd is intense. Over 20,000 casualties on the 2nd, even though the fighting doesn't start till 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which obviously tells you something. And secondly, they're not the only ones making mistakes. The Union Army, in the person of General Dan Sickles of the Union 3rd Corps, make one major mistake out of a place called the Peach Orchard.
Yeah.
Okay, you do the selfie and then we'll come in.
Okay.
See you,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, that is great.
This is pretty cool. Get a good close-up of it here. Some of these might be hard to see. Not much I can do about it though.
Okay, we're on Cemetery Ridge. We're looking across at Seminary Ridge. Meads equestrian statue. Galloway. The Confederates are going to begin the offensive at around 1 o'clock in the afternoon with 160 artillery pieces, trying to strike this area left and right of us as hard as they could to knock out Union artillery, kill or demoralize the main Union infantry line. We're going to have a couple of problems with their artillery barrage. One is that a lot of the fuses and the exploding rounds were manufactured in a different factory than they were used to. Estimates are half or more of these become overshots. Okay. The second problem, it's an absolutely still day. This is not the era of smokeless powder. So artillery on both sides is bellowing out huge volumes of black smoke. It's hanging along the ground, making it more difficult for them to see how much damage they're doing. But it's been going on for close to 2 hours. Longstreet now in command of the attack. He's told if you don't send the men soon, we'll have no long-range ammunition left at all to support the advance. Standing nearby is George Pickett, leading one of the 3 divisions that makes the attack. Pickett enthusiastic and optimistic, Longstreet quite pessimistic. He will write in his memoirs that this was the most depressing day of his life, and that he had told Lee before the attack began that no 15,000 men arrayed for battle could take this position. Guess what? He's already been given orders to try and do so. So Pickett goes to Longstreet, asks him, General, shall we advance the men? Longstreet, unable to even use words to reply. He'll reluctantly nod his head up and down once or twice. Pickett takes that as a yes. And soon after, coming out of that tree line, a half mile on either side of the Virginia mountain will come towards us, a modern day estimate of 12,500 Confederates. Once they get out of the trees, they start becoming better targets for long-range Union artillery fire. Here are the limbers and caissons, the only place they have them set up on the battlefield. A couple of times, many of them get into protected swales out there. That's where they'll redress the lines, fill in the gaps where maybe wounded flag bearers would pass flags to somebody else. My guess is there's a lot of prayers being said out there too. They won't start taking most of their casualties until they hit the Gettysburg Road. And notice what you see out there, a double row of post and rail fences. The originals of these would have had their vertical posts sunk a foot or more in the ground. Now some had been knocked down in the second, some still remain. They thought the weight of the advance would knock the rest of them over. Frequently that doesn't happen, so if they wanted to keep on coming, they had to climb them, which slows them down and starts making them now better targets for Union infantry who will stand and start firing at a virtually stationary Confederate target. Now we're not certain how many Confederates make it across the Gettysburg Road. But one thing we do know is that around this time, the Union Army is sensing where the attack is cresting. And they're going to send that infantry both south and north of the Confederate line. So now what's going on, although this is not the scale, Confederates are entering the open side of a 3-sided box. Infantry fire from 3 directions. Bronze artillery is now firing canister like this. 27 of these iron balls, about the size of golf balls, but 2.5 times heavier, going a distance of 400 yards. They're leaving the muzzle at 500 miles an hour. And sometimes they're firing double and triple canister in one blast. There'll still be 2 temporary breakthroughs, the smaller of the 2, a little bit to the left of the clump of trees. 75 to 100 men break through there. We have accounts of hand-to-hand fighting going on within the trees. Probably not much longer than 10 minutes. So as it very quickly happens, is unthreatened Union troops further south now have no one in front of them, including remnants of the 1st Minnesota sent into this area. They surround those men. Most of them become prisoners. Largest breakthrough, to the left of where that single tree now stands. The stone wall creates a 90-degree angle about where that monument and the tree is. On the other side of it are 250 to 300 Confederates, now led by Pickett's last standing brigade commander. This is Lewis Armstead. Ironically, his uncle is in charge of Fort McHenry when it's fired on by the British during the War of 1812 and when our national anthem is written. So to motivate those men, he's going to take his sword, ram it through his hat, hold it above his head, and use words similar to these. Who will follow me? Give them the cold steel, meaning the bayonet. So in those words, they rush the wall. They head back towards Cushing's battery, which had probably been abandoned. They're attempting to turn around a couple of these to fire them on reserve Union troops behind us, when Armstead will be mortally wounded. Right, you see that small scroll monument, which winds up being placed there 24 years after the battle, in part by the men of the Philadelphia Brigade, who probably killed Armstead in an act of reconciliation towards the Virginians in 1887. So the Day 3 attack, known by most people as Pickett's Charge, will begin from Seminary Ridge at 3. It's estimated to be over here about an hour later. The death and devastation would have been tremendous. Men, materiel, as many as 5,000 dead horses and mules over the 3 days of the battle. The next day, July 4th, both armies still here. Some skirmishing out along Emmitsburg Road. Lee fearful that Meade might attack him. But that will not take place. So night falls on the 4th in a very heavy rain, and Lee will take that opportunity to begin his retreat back to Virginia. In that retreat, he has a wagon train of wounded. The man leading it will later write that it was 17 miles long, and he leaves behind 2,500 wounded Confederates and 10% of his medical staff, purposely because he knows they're going to be overwhelmed. So Gettysburg becomes a Civil War battle with the most casualties, 51 to 52,000, killed, wounded, captured, missing. Area around the tree is frequently called the high water mark of the Confederacy. Symbolic, because the war will go on for another 21 more months. This is the beginning of the beginning of the end. Can we take some photos here? Anybody have questions?
Okay, here we are at the peach orchard. I don't know if you can read all that. You'll probably have to pause it to read it, but it's a pretty neat place. These black cannons here are the ones that have the rifled bores in them. I believe the guide earlier said that they could fire approximately about 2.8 miles. The peach orchard. As opposed to the black rifled barrels, these are the brass smoothbore barrels. They only had a distance of about a mile, maybe a little bit more, according to the guide. That symbol right there has an eagle and a globe on it. Very similar to my beloved Eagle, Globe and Anchor of the United States Marine Corps. I don't know anything about that one. If anybody does know anything about that emblem, please let me know. Yeah, these are the smoothbore. There is no rifling in them. And they actually have peaches on them. There are peaches laying on the ground. And there are peaches up in the tree.
Turn left onto Sickles Avenue. Continue on Sickles Avenue for half a mile. In 800 feet, slight right on US 15, Business North. Slight right onto US 15, Business North. Continue on US 15, Business North for 1 mile. Your destination is on the left.
Alright. Here's another area we're going to explore. There's the Lincoln Speech Memorial, Soldiers National Monument, New York State Monument, General Reynolds Monument. I don't know that I'm going to go through all that, but we'll check it out.
get your gun.
Either way. Are you walking down there? Yep. All right, I'm
Get that?
Okay, I'm going to wrap this up. I hope you enjoyed this tour of Gettysburg that I did today. This looks like a pretty good place to end this with men that were men and fighting for what they believed in.